Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day this is. Hope it finds you well. My name is John. I am an author, and welcome to my writing corner. I'm here today, day late. Normally do this on Thursdays, but reading chapter 17 of my first book, The Shadow of the Past. Uh, didn't get this up yesterday because my first attempt at recording this. It was during the period in the afternoon where the medication I take for both my ADHD and depression was wearing off, so it was a very unfocused recording, and I figured re-recording it would probably be easier than attempting to edit that mess. So I hope you enjoy. This is a chapter that I'm particularly proud of. So I do hope you like it. Regardless of whether you like it or not, I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. It also would really help me in the channel out if you were to like, share, and subscribe. All that's down below, as well as check out my books that are linked in the description. For now, I'm going to go ahead and get kicked off here with Chapter 17, A Trial by Starlight. The statue watched. It could do nothing else. It had stood for a time beyond its own reckoning, and it would stand there until the terror came to an end if it had to. It had sworn an oath to that effect, and it had sealed that pact with its very existence. All of this it knew, and little else. A stone does not think, and it does not feel, but the statue knew the long millennia as a burden. Its burden. The statue saw everything going on around it, and had sworn thus, but cared not at all. The elves which tended the veil were of little consequence to it. For all the elves' power and wisdom and longevity, they still fade after a time. And what is a millennium to a stone? It was only the trials which provided vivid memories for the statue. Those stark moments of awareness punctuated long stretches of nothing, like a stone skipping across the surface of time. The elves called them the Trials of Starlight, but the name did not matter, and in a sense neither did their role. The questions were older than the great burden, and they were asked with all due reverence to their antiquity and origins, but rarely did the elves decide the matter. As had been decreed when the great burden had begun, to reach the summit and all its secrets, one had to get past both the questions and it. It was at these moments that the elves spoke the words, and the statue would, for a brief moment, come to life to do what it had sworn to do. Many had come, drawn by the desire for the power of the place, but numbers beyond reckoning had faced it. All of them had died at the edge of its axe. The statue had noticed this new elf before he had even set foot in the great hall. Something was different about him. His presence in the grot was the strongest of any who had entered the vale since the before time. This elf reminded it of the one in whose name the burden had been taken on, but that did not matter. All had to face the trials. This new elf was carried in several hours after the elves' meal and bound to the Nullstone. He had awoken a short time later, angered, but then again they all were. All who came thought themselves beholden of the power, and all resented having to prove their worth. All of them were brought to this place, however, and all of them, reluctant or not, faced the trials, and all had been found wanting. The statue was attentive as only a statue can be, for this was yet again the moment for which it had taken so onerous a burden upon itself. After the priestess and the watchers took their seat, then the questioning began as it always did. "For what reason do you come to the Vale of Twilight?" asked the priestess solemnly. The statue focused on the elf, standing as defiantly as one bound to a stone can, to see how he would answer the first test of virtue: honesty. The bound elf regarded the priestess carefully before answering. "I am seeking to gain entry to Anarakater." He said this looking directly into the priestess's eyes. The elf certainly did not lack for bravery and for basic honesty, but there was a long way to go before one could be considered worthy. Next came the test of the rightness of action. "For what purpose do you seek Anarakater?" This time the elf responded immediately and forcefully. "All of Sirana is under threat. An outside force is at work in Sirana for its own ends, and it is threatening to release Kiral, and the evil sealed away with him 10 millennia ago. The only chance of combating either is with the power that was once possessed by the elves of balance, and thus I seek the home of my people of old so that I may attain their power. Something stirred within the statue at the mention of Kiral, an old memory awakening from bygone years. It had heard the name long ago, an ancient menace. The elf's cause certainly seemed right, and his honesty about wanting the power of Anarchater was a rare thing among those who had been given the trials. Why do you need the power of your forefathers to combat these threats to Sirana? Surely there are other powers and other resources in the world, the priestess asked, as a follow up to his response. The bound elf did not hesitate in his answer. There are other powers indeed, but they have been robbed of the greater part of their strength, perhaps by the interference of that outside power. Although the power you doubtless sense within me is what gifts they were able to bestow. I have also worked since I found out about this danger to oppose this hostile force and have thus gathered many allies from across the land. It is not enough. However, if what the stories say about Kiral and what is locked away with him are true, then both the power that I have acquired and my allies will be as naught. More long gone memories, like flickers of light in the darkness, spun through the statue's head, and it wondered if what the bound elf said were true and the world really was in such peril. These reflections did not last long in the presence of the thought and the will that caused it to make its sacrifice, that none but one who was worthy must gain access to an Ericter. After all, what good was it to exchange one danger for another? Amid this pondering, which was the most the statue had thought in millennia, it was only dimly aware of the question of intention, although it had been asked so many times before that it did not need to hear it to know what it had been asked. Although still looking defiant, the fettered elf did not respond so quickly to this question. When he finally did so, he spoke in a quieter and more measured tone than he had thus far used at the trial. My first intention is to put an end to the Telmaran Union, an alliance of cities which is enthralled to the outside force of which I spoke and the threat it poses. After that is done, I will endeavor to drive Ushara, the outside force, or perhaps just its agent from Sirana. If in so doing I cannot prevent the release of Kiral, I shall do everything in my power to see that his power is once more contained if destroying him proves impossible, which I fear that it may be. The statue saw the sense in this response, although it was caused some concern that this elf felt it necessary to employ the power of his ancestors against other peoples of the Terra. It was also apparent to the statue that the elves shared its concern. After a long silence and some long looks between them, the elf to the right of the priestess asked, "You feel there is necessity in turning this power on other people of Sirana, which Torinar sought to protect by sealing an Erikater until it was needed?" The reply was grim and resigned, but direct. "It is my hope that if you give me access to this power, that I can cut short a deadly and disastrous war and end the threat of the Union before any serious harm is done. However, I fear that some of the Union will die, and that grieves me terribly, especially seeing as how they were misled into this. But that does not alter the fact that it was their choice to follow Ushar and her false promises of glory. I hope that I can spare most of them from paying the ultimate price for their misguided loyalty, but I doubt greatly that I can spare them all." Remorse, that was something that it did not encounter often from those on trial, and this gave it hope that this elf would be the one to finally pass the trials. But there was still much left to do, and he had not yet given proof of his worth. Based on the almost inaudible chatter between them, the statue guessed that the elves felt the same, and since it led naturally into the question of necessity. "So, you are willing to kill for your cause, then?" The bound one's response was swift, but not brash or uncaring. "I have, and would again, although I avoid it if I can. The killing of another is always a regrettable act, but there are times when it cannot be helped. There are times when not everyone can be spared or saved." So far, this elf had done better in the questioning than any had in millennia, but there was one more question which the elves had to ask, the question of command. "It sounds as though you intend to serve as the commander in this war to come. Are you willing to send your soldiers and followers into dangerous and even knowingly deadly situations for your cause? Would you join them?" The pause was long and the bound elf's face was intense. His response was slow, as if wary of some kind of entrapment. but retained the same confidence that it had from the start. I do not do so gladly, and I will endeavor everything in my power to avoid sending my soldiers into dangerous situations. But if there is no other choice, then I will do it, and I intend to be in the front lines with them. I will not ask any who serve me to do anything that I would not do, regardless of the consequences. Only a few had ever answered this question correctly, although the statue thought the elf sounded indecisive about ordering others to their deaths. This was certainly not an easy thing, nor a thing to do lightly or without cause, but it reflected that there were certainly times when decisive action was needed, even at the cost of lives. The bound elf had answered all of the questions well, but that did not ultimately matter, for it was not the guardians who ultimately had the decision. You have done well, Val'inar, very well indeed. So I am allowed to pass and enter in Erikater? You have satisfied us, but the decision is not ours. To pass through the pale and ascend the hill, you must get past Hrathur. What do you mean, get past? You are a warrior, are you not? And is it not said that you only truly know someone once you have fought them? That was the decision made of old. You must fight Hrathur, and only by passing this final test will you be allowed to pass. The priestess motioned for the bound elf to be freed from his bonds and have his weapon returned to him. While this was being done, she walked to the statue's base. This was what it had been waiting for, the moment of truth, the rare moments through the millennia where the stone came to life. Once the elf was armed, the priestess turned to it and spoke the words, calling it to fulfill its duty. Life, feeling, energy welled up inside it. It could actually feel its arms and legs. It could actually move. Slowly, ponderously, it flexed its arms as the life force of the dwarf it once was filled every intricate line of the stone. It lifted its great axe and with a crashing step left the plinth on which it stood. He was not as tall as the elf, but he could see the mixture of wonder and fear in the elf's eyes as he beheld his challenger. With the other elves having quickly moved away and the statue having flexed its long dormant limbs to shake off the weight of years, the two combatants faced each other 20 paces apart. The radiant green eyes of the statue met the deep blue eyes of the elf, and they stared each other down until the elf's eyes began to water. The statue lifted its great axe and held it against its chest and bowed in the traditional salute of the dwarves. The elf held the sword for a moment before its face and with a flourish bowed as well. This was the moment that the statue enjoyed, combat, its purpose, the final test, and after that long, sweet second of anticipation, the combatants moved toward each other decisively. The statue never found the combat as fulfilling as those moments of anticipation beforehand. The elf was good, that much was certain, but what was an elf whose life encompassed but a few centuries to sentinel, which had done nothing but fight for millennia? The elf was certainly fast as well, but speed only matters in combat if the skills of the combatants are equal, and that was certainly not the case. Time and again, time and again, the elves' blades soared through the air, and time and again, it met the dwarves' axe, raised almost casually to intercept it. The statue did not make any attempt yet to strike the elf down, for there was not yet a point to doing so. He had not tested the elf yet, and besides, he could sense the power within him. No doubt expecting to be struck, the elf was concentrating virtually all of his considerable power on defending himself, and thus could not be harmed save by magic. The stone with which it and its axe were made was all but impervious to harm, both physical and magical, but for all its hardness and sharpness, his axe could not penetrate those defenses. However, the elf could not maintain the defense forever, and stone is patient. It had waited for 10 millennia. As compared to that, even a few hours would be as naught. No, it was not yet time to strike this elf down. It still remained to be seen what else he would do. The elf seemed to be realizing that he could not, for all his speed, get underneath the statue's guard, so he spun away and stretched forth his power to the ground beneath the statue's feet. Almost immediately, green shoots curled up around from the ground and entwined themselves around the legs and chest of the statues, tendrils seeking in vain to find any crack or crevice which it could exploit or tear the statue apart. The statue would almost have smiled if it could. The elf had been paying attention when told that the stone was all but impervious to magic, so he'd use more indirect means to try and bind him. The elves called the stone Feren, but to the dwarves it was Raktuana, the flawless stone. It did not crack or weather or fade. It was the rarest stone known to dwarf lore, the deepest and most skilled delvers of all the mortal races upon Sirana, and the most skilled with stonework. If the greatest magic of elves and men and dwarves could do but little to the stone, then no force of nature would either. The statue waited just long enough so that the elf would begin to think his plan had worked before stepping forward. The vines struggled mightily to hold it in place, but they creaked and snapped, and the statue advanced on its opponent. The look of dismay on the elf's face was momentary only, and he returned to trying to find a hole in the statue's defense, perhaps while he thought of a new plan. The statue decided to throw the occasional easy to dodge attack at the elf to keep him on his toes. He was particularly impressed when one such blow was skillfully dodged, and the sword came around and clipped its shoulder. This did nothing but nick the elf's blade, however. The statue could tell by the smell of the metal that it was simple steel. Elven steel and well forged, to be sure, but steel nonetheless, and what was steel against stone, let alone Ruktana? This continued for several minutes longer, and it was clear that the elf was growing frustrated. They all did, and that was when they began to make mistakes. Therefore, it decided to push the elf further into despair. Thus far, he'd been blocking the elf's blade with the flat of his axe, but on the next swift swing of the elf, he deftly turned the blade of the axe to the sword. With a loud snap, much of the blade bounced off the statue's head and went spinning away. The elf looked at his broken weapon in disbelief as he staggered away from his relentless advancing opponent. The statue could see the look of desperation in his eyes, as it had seen it in the eyes of so many others. His weapons were gone, his power were useless, and he faced his implacable foe. The, under- the statue wondered what desperate measure the elf would use to try and destroy it, or whether the elf would surprise it. But then again, all of them tried and failed and died. That was the whole point. This elf had something different in his face, however, thoughtfulness. It was something it had never seen before, and then he did the truly unexpected. The elf stared into its eyes. Calmly, he cast the now useless handle of his sword away and sunk to his knees. Breaking eye contact with his advancing opponent, at last the elf said, "I submit myself to you, Hrathur. If it is your judgment that I die, destroy me." This was something undreamt of, unheard of in 10 millennia of waiting. For the first time, the statue felt an urge to speak. Its jaw groaned, and a voice like the rumble of rocks down a mountainside spoke. "You submit? Why do you submit?" "Because I cannot beat you, and if you are the final judge of who shall pass and go to Anarakater, then I submit myself to your judgment." "But what of the trial?" the statue boomed. "You were told that you had to get past me. Do you value your cause so little?" "The priestess said that I had to get past you, not that I had to destroy you or even defeat you. Simply that you were the final judge and that the trial was by combat. Perhaps more is said of someone when they admit that they cannot win, and I cannot. Steel is useless against your hard stone, as is all the power I possess. I could perhaps find some way to trick you or entrap you, but I don't think that is the point. As to my cause, yes, I do value it greatly, but you have heard my case, and if you still judge me unworthy, and I say to you, destroy me, I will make no attempt to stop you." The statue considered this for a moment. "So you would die willingly?" "Not willingly, but if you, who has watched and waited and guarded, feel that I am not worthy of the power that is in Anarakater, if you feel that Serana would profit from my destruction and the continued protection of that power, then so be it." With that, the statue took 3 strides toward Val'inar, and without a moment's hesitation, took the elf by the arm and lifted him to his feet as if he weighed nothing. "At last, someone who understands." The elf looked both relieved and slightly puzzled at this. "Understands?" "Understands what sacrifice is," replied the statue. "Understands the truth of our sacrifice. Understands the lesson of your forefather." "Tornar gave his life to defeat Kiral," said the elf, the dawning of understanding coming into his eyes.
Yes, the statue replied. It is not enough to face danger with your soldiers. Torinar accepted certain death willingly and without regret to defeat Kiral. That is what makes a true leader and someone who is truly worthy of power. Not someone who is brave and not someone who is willing to use it, but someone who is willing to lose everything to save and protect. There are always times when you must kill for their cause, unfortunate as that is, but to sacrifice oneself for the sake of their cause is something else entirely.
With that, the elf turned to the priestess who was approaching him, smiling. Thank you, Alira. I was angry with you at first for what you did to me, but in your own way you helped me to understand. Am I now worthy to ascend to an Erikater? The priestess responded, Yes, yes, Val'inar, as I hoped that you would be. You are indeed worthy of the power that Torinar left in trust for one to find in an hour of need. May I have the stone, then, that will allow me to pass through the barrier protecting the hill? The statue boomed in response.
It is not hers to give. It is here around my neck and shall be yours once I have taken my final rest.
Your final rest?
Yes, my task is done. The task of all the dwarves who made the final sacrifice here is done. Our spirits will pass into the earth, and these bodies will move no more, and be simply statues, an eternal reminder of our 10 millennia of vigil.
Is there nothing I can do to convince you otherwise? Pleaded the elf. I could certainly use such as you in the war that is to come. The statue was already moving its way slowly back to its plinth, and as it climbed back up it said, growing ever more quiet,
No, we have had enough of combat, enough of war. Our age of the world is long past, and in any case our vow prevents us leaving the veil. We have borne our vigil willingly, and would do so for another 10,000 years, but now that it is over we are much wearied, and we go now to our deserved rest. Remember our sacrifice. Do not forget us.
as the statue had once gained such pleasure when the spirit welled up inside it and it came to life, so much more was its pleasure as the spirit that knew itself, so long as Hrathur ebbed from its body, this time forever, and passed slowly into the earth. The last thing it saw as it blissfully slid away was the elf solemnly removing the stone from around its neck. And after wishing the statue the peace and rest it deserved, he set off up the hill, and with that, the statue watched no more. All right. I do hope you enjoyed that chapter. Um, I said it would mean a lot for me if you leave a comment on what you liked about the reading, the voices, the story so far, everything like that. I would really appreciate it. I would also appreciate if you were to like, share, subscribe, check out my website, check out my books, all that good stuff. Check me out on Instagram, whatever. That would all be really appreciated, and there'll be a playlist somewhere here in just a second that has the full list of the videos of me reading the book so far. But for the moment, I do hope you all have a wonderful day, get a chance to do or experience something creative, and I'll catch you on the next one.